The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
With The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms currently airing and the return of House of the Dragon Season 3 coming this summer, we're officially back in Westeros. And if you're looking for that same political backstabbing and massive scale, you don't have to wait for the next episode. Today we're looking at the most ambitious historical dramas ever filmed, from the $90 million gamble of the Mongol Empire to the lawless pirate bays of the West Indies. And we're starting with a show that proved Netflix wasn't afraid to spend a fortune. Marco Polo takes you to 13th century Asia, where a young Marco Polo, played by Lorenzo Richelme, is abandoned by his father as a literal human tax to the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. So Marco finds himself a prisoner in the glittering court of Kublai Khan. And the Khan is so fascinated by Marco's unique perspective and gift with words that he makes Marco his personal spy and advisor, which means Marco has to navigate a nest of vipers in the palace. And that includes the Khan's own son, Prince Jingjim, who hates that a Latin foreigner has the respect he's been craving his whole life. So to survive, Marco starts training with 100 Eyes, who's a blind Taoist monk played by Tom Wu, who turns him into a lethal warrior. And while Marco is trying to find his place, the Khan, who's obsessed with his grandfather Genghis's legacy, is launching a brutal war to conquer the walled city of the Song dynasty. But standing in his way is the sinister Chancellor Jia Sidao, who's a brilliant Mantis-style martial arts master who controls the last of the Chinese resistance from the shadows. Netflix spent $90 million on the first season alone, and at the time, only Game of Thrones was playing at that level, and you can see every cent of that gamble on the screen. The costume design is incredible, and it features some of the best choreographed Wushu fights you'll ever see. But because it was so expensive, Netflix unfortunately pulled the plug after season 2. But while it ends on a cliffhanger, the 20 episodes we do have are some of the most beautiful TV ever filmed. Plus, there's a special 30-minute prequel called 100 Eyes that's a perfect origin story for the blind monk. And while Marco Polo was a casualty of its own massive budget, our next show proved that you can build a massive cinematic world and actually stick the landing. Black Sail serves as a prequel to the classic novel Treasure Island, and it's set in 1715 on New Providence Island, which is a lawless pirate paradise. And that's where we meet a much younger and more lethal Captain Flint, who is played by Toby Stephens. Flint is arguably the most feared pirate in the West Indies, but his crew is on the verge of mutiny because they aren't making enough money, and the British Royal Navy is closing in to wipe them out for good. Then in walks John Silver, a fast-talking silver-tongued drifter with no loyalty to anyone. Silver manages to steal a secret schedule for a Spanish ship carrying a fortune in gold. So Flint has to form a shaky alliance with Silver and team up with the calculating woman who runs the local black market just to fund the hunt for this treasure. And you've got other legendary pirates like Charles Vane and Jack Rackham all circling the same prize and waiting for Flint to slip up. And this all builds into an explosive struggle where they're fighting for the right to exist in a world that wants them dead. The show is executive produced by Michael Bay, so you know the ship battles are going to be incredible, and the character development is insane. The characters you hate in Season 1 will likely be your favorites by Season 4. The show is also praised for its incredible practical effects and for winning 3 Emmys for its sound and visual effects. And while the first season is a bit slow and leans a little hard into the violence and nudity, it really finds its footing in Season 2. So just get through the first 3 episodes and I promise you'll be hooked for the next 4 seasons. Plus, the finale leads right into the events of Treasure Island, so it's a complete story. And if you like your historical epics with a side of ancient mystery, you have to check out Romulus. It kicks off in the city of Alba Longa, where King Numitor gets a prophecy so dark it sends him into exile, leaving his grandsons Yemos and Anitos to deal with the fallout. But their uncle is hungry for power and orchestrates a bloodbath that leaves Yemos running for his life in the wild. We also follow Wyros, a slave thrown into the dark woods for a terrifying rite of passage where young men have to survive on their own, which is where Yemos and Wyros meet and have to rely on each other to survive. But the forest is home to a mysterious savage cult that lives by tribal laws and follows a goddess named Rumia. And when the primal survival in the wild meets the political backstabbing in the city, it all builds towards a massive clash where the outcasts of the world eventually band together to birth what will become the greatest empire in history. And like most of the shows we'll cover, it's pretty dark and violent, so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But the coolest part is that the whole show is filmed in Archaic Latin, so it feels incredibly immersive and authentic. The show's also been praised for its historical detail and world building. And while we're all crossing our fingers for a third season, the 18 episodes available tell a pretty epic self-contained story. The next show redefined historical TV for the modern era. Vikings kicks off in the small muddy village of Kattegat where we meet Ragnar Lothbrok. He's played by the incredible Travis Fimmel, and at first he's just a simple farmer with the wild revolutionary idea to sail west into the unknown ocean. But the local chieftain, Earl Haraldson, flat out forbids it because he's terrified of losing his iron grip on the village. So Ragnar goes rogue and teams up with his eccentric and slightly mad best friend Floki, who secretly builds a new generation of longships that can survive the open sea. When they finally hit the shores of England, they sack a monastery and capture a monk named Athelstan. But instead of just killing him, Ragnar keeps him as a slave. And that turns into a multi-season entanglement where the heathen and the Christians start to influence each other. Ragnar launches subsequent raids where he's joined by his wife Lagertha and his brother Rollo to prove to his people and the Earl that his vision of the West is real, all while dodging the Earl's attempts to have his head chopped off back home. The show has 89 episodes total, with the first 3 seasons having about 10 episodes and the later ones having around 20 episodes. And if you finish all 6 seasons and still want more, there's a sequel series called Vikings Valhalla on Netflix. It's set about 100 years later when the Viking Age is reaching its absolute breaking point. The story starts with a horrifying event called the St. Brice's Day Massacre, where the King of England orders his men to wipe out every Viking living on British soil. So naturally, the Viking world is out for blood, and they all converge on Kattegat to plan their revenge. And that's where we meet our main trio. Leif Erikson, played by Sam Corlett, arrives from Greenland with his sister Freydis, who is a fierce pagan warrior hunting a man who scarred her years ago. They both get swept up in the invasion when they meet Harald Sigurdsson, who's a charismatic prince who wants to be king of Norway even though he's a Christian. And their leader is the brilliant but terrifying King Canute, who's trying to lead a massive invasion to take London while also trying to keep his own people from killing each other over their gods. Because it's not just Vikings versus England, it's also pagans versus Christians within the same army. And back in England, you've got the calculated Queen Emma of Normandy, played by Laura Berlin, and the manipulative Earl Godwin, played by David Oakes, trying to outsmart the Vikings before the ships even hit the shore and making their own moves for the crown. Just like the original show, the action is incredible and the production value is top tier. And while you don't technically have to watch Vikings to understand what's happening, there are tons of Easter eggs and nods to Ragnar Lothbrok that make it more rewarding if you do. The other way to understand the Vikings is to see them through the eyes of the people they were trying to conquer. And that takes us to The Last Kingdom, which covers the exact same era but from the English perspective. It's set in 9th century England, which back then was just a bunch of separate kingdoms getting steamrolled by Viking invaders. And right in the middle, that is Uhtred of Bebbanburg. Uhtred is born a Saxon nobleman's son, but he's captured as a boy and raised by the Danes as one of their own. But then tragedy strikes his adopted family and he's forced to flee, which leads him straight into the service of King Alfred the Great, played by David Dawson. And these two men quickly realize they need each other to survive. Alfred is a sickly and brilliant strategist who wants to unite all of England under one god, while Uhtred is a brash pagan warrior who wants to use Alfred's army to reclaim his ancestral home of Bebbanburg from his treacherous uncle. So Uhtred is caught between his Saxon blood and his Danish heart, and he's constantly being tested by his childhood friend Brida, who stays loyal to the Danes, and the fierce Viking warlord Ubba, who is based on the real-life historical figure Ubba Ragnarsson, who's said to be one of the sons of Ragnar. The Last Kingdom is a fast-paced show full of grand battles and shocking betrayals. And David Dawson's performance is widely considered one of the best portrayals of a king in TV history. The show was also originally produced by BBC Two, but Netflix took over completely later on. And the best part is that after you finish all 5 seasons, there's a full-length movie called Seven Kings Must Die that officially wraps up Uhtred's entire saga. And if you want to go back even further, before the Vikings and the Saxons, to the empire that laid the groundwork for the entire Western world, you have to look at the gold standard of historical TV, HBO's Rome. It's set in 52 BC, right as the Roman Republic is starting to crumble under its own weight. We follow Lucius Vorenus, played by Kevin McKidd, who is a stern, honorable centurion, and his total opposite, Titus Polo, played by the late Ray Stevenson, who is a wild, wine-loving force of nature who constantly gets them into trouble. And their lives change forever when they're sent on a mission to recover Caesar's stolen gold standard. Julius Caesar, played by the commanding Ciaran Hinds, is returning from the wars in Gaul as a hero. But his old friend Pompey Magnus and the elite Senate are terrified he's going to turn into a dictator. So the Senate uses every legal trick and political threat in the book to try and strip Caesar of his command and brand him a criminal. And through a mix of Polo's recklessness and Vorenus' discipline, they keep stumbling into the middle of the Senate's secret plans. Vorenus and Polo basically act as the butterfly effect for some of history's biggest moments, which creates a perfect loop where the soldiers' survival keeps the politics moving and the politics keeps the soldiers in the line of fire. The show is a massive co-production between HBO and the BBC, and it's praised for having the best version of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony ever put on screen. It also has a chaotic and unsanitized look that won it 7 Emmys. There are only 2 seasons total because the budget was an insane $10 million per episode. And because they knew they were being canceled, they crammed about 3 seasons worth of plot into the last 5 episodes. So the pacing is incredibly fast. But the creators still managed to wrap up the story in a way that feels satisfying. The next show on our list is Britannia, and it's set in 43 AD when the Roman Imperial Army is returning to conquer the British Isles. Leading them is General Aulus Plautius, played by David Morrissey, but he's stepping into a minefield because the region is already being torn apart by a blood feud between the Canti tribe, led by Princess Cara, and their rivals the Regni, led by Queen Antidia. But General Aulus realizes he can't just conquer them with brute force, so he starts playing the 2 women against each other and using their hatred to clear a path for Rome. But while they're fighting, the real power lies with the terrifying druids who pull the strings of every tribe. And the only thing they fear is a prophecy involving a young girl named Kate. Kate ends up on the run and teams up with a rogue outcast druid named Divis. And their journey starts to tie all these factions together in a way that could end the Roman occupation before it even begins. The show is relentless with its tone. One minute you're watching a brutal battle, and the next you're seeing a druid have a vision that looks like a 70s rock video. And so as you'd expect, it's criticized for being historically all over the place, but it's so original and the costume design is so incredible that you can't look away. But it was cancelled in 2023 after a 3-season run, so it ends on a massive cliffhanger. Next we have Knightfall, which is set in the 14th century, years after the Knights Templar lost their foothold. We follow a veteran knight named Landry du Lauzon, played by Tom Cullen. Landry is the quintessential warrior monk, but he's secretly struggling with his faith and he's carrying out a very forbidden romance with Queen Joan of France. Then word gets out that the Holy Grail, which everyone thought was lost at sea, has actually resurfaced in France. So the entire first season is a race against time where Landry and the Templar Knights are hunting for the Grail to restore their order's glory, while they're being hunted by King Philip IV of France, who is drowning in debt to the Templars and looking for any excuse to burn them at the stake. And so you've got secret societies, royal backstabbing, and massive siege battles all clashing at once. And by the time Mark Hamill joins in season 2, the show goes full throttle into an epic war between church and state. And if you love the style of Knightfall but want something you can finish in a single weekend, these last 2 picks are for you. Barbarians takes place in 9 AD in the muddy forest-covered land of Germania, where the local tribes are being squeezed dry by the Romans for taxes and tribute. and the Roman officer sent to keep them in line is a man named Arminius. But Arminius was actually born to a Germanic chieftain, and was taken to Rome as a child hostage to ensure peace. So he grew up as a Roman noble and trained in their elite tactics. But now he's back in his homeland and he's seeing his own people treated like dirt by the very many leads. And to top it off, his childhood friends Thusnelda and Folkwind decide they've had enough of the Roman boot. So they pull off a daring heist to steal a Roman eagle, which is the ultimate symbol of the Empire's pride. And that forces a brutal crackdown on their village. But the tribes are completely outmatched, and the only way they can win is through Arminius' inside knowledge of the Roman military. So now Arminius is caught in the middle. Does he stick with the empire that raised him, or does he side with the barbarians he was born to? This all builds toward the legendary Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where these two worlds finally collide in one of the most famous ambushes in history. The armor, the sets, and those dark forests look amazing. Though some people think the show is a little loose with the history of certain characters, and the English dub is hit or miss. But the show is currently finished after 2 seasons, and with only 6 episodes per season, it's a perfect weekend binge. Our final show takes that same energy to 11th century Spain. El Cid, or the Legend of El Cid, drops us in the Kingdom of Leon, where we meet a guy named Rui, who you probably know as Denver from Money Heist. And at first, Rui is just a humble squire who's trying to find his place in a court that treats him like a nobody. But then he accidentally discovers a massive conspiracy to overthrow the king, which is made even worse by the fact that his own grandfather is one of the people plotting the assassination. And to top it off, 11th century Spain is made up of bickering Christian kingdoms and Muslim taifas that are poised for an epic collision. So suddenly Rui is fighting alongside Muslim allies against his own Christian kin. And he's doing all of this while trying to root out the traitors back home without getting his family executed for treason. And in the midst of that, the king's children are at each other's throats fighting over the crown. This all builds to an epic collision at the Battle of Grouse, where Rui has to become a hero for the enemy while being viewed as a traitor by his own people. The show's production value is insane, and Jaime Lorenti's performance is a huge draw. The sword fighting feels very visceral and less choreographed, and the battle scenes feel very heavy and real. People also especially love the complex portrayal of Urraca, who's basically the Cersei Lannister of medieval Spain. There are 2 seasons total with 5 episodes each, so it's a very quick watch, and perfect if you want something epic that won't take weeks to finish. And whether you want the tactical genius of King Alfred or the visceral swordplay of El Cid, there's enough on this list to keep you busy for months. But I want to know, which of these did you think was cancelled too soon? And if I missed your favorite historical epic, drop it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.